Number 10, the International Space Station. Look to the sky because that's where we are starting off our list today. The International Space Station is an ongoing mega project that is already a stepping stone towards humanity's exploration of the stars. Every 92 minutes, the ISS circles are taking in the ultimate bird's eye view of our planet. It's already racked up quite the bill and it keeps on going. In 2019, it announced construction plans that will amount to over $60 billion in costs. Eventually, they want the station to be big enough to house over 1 million off-Earth occupants, like an actual habitat for humans in space. We are so close. How nuts is that? By the end of the project, the final cost is projected to be around $1 trillion. But considering they're aiming for life in space, I'd say kind of what we need to do, like take my money, but also I need money for rent in Toronto because that's really expensive. So maybe we can work on installments. I don't know, but I just do it. Do it! I love it. I love that idea. It's a great idea.
Number 9, 10-cent beer night. In Ontario, Canada, we are all too familiar with people making stupid decisions for a buck of beer. If you're curious to search on Google buck of beer, you'll know. I'll admit this one isn't all mysterious, but it was too funny not to include. The 10-cent beer night was an experiment that took place in 1974, orchestrated by the Cleveland Indians. They wanted to increase game attendance, so they introduced a 10-cent beer promotion. You could have as much beer for as only 10 cents a glass. As you can guess, the worst idea ever. Needless to say, the stadium was packed with those enticed by the promotion. Their game against the Texas Rangers included a whole lot of nudity and debauchery. The game included at one point a woman running into the Indians' on-deck circle and flashing the umpire. Then there was a naked fan running onto the field sliding into second base, and a father and son duo who ran onto the outfield and mooned the bleacher section. Yeah. Fans started launching fireworks into the Rangers' dugout, resulting in an all-out riot. They ended up abandoning the promotion, only to bring it back later with a limit of 2 per person. I mean, I guess it worked. It's not mysterious, but it's funny, so I hope you laughed. Number 8, Henry A. Murray. This is sadly the real-life version of Clockwork Orange, if you've ever seen that movie. Henry A. Murray was a psychologist who may have been responsible, part, for Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Ted was an undergrad at Harvard in the 1950s and 60s and participated in a 3-year study with Murray. Murray was trying to explore the effects of stress on the human psyche. Ted, along with 21 other students, were asked to write an essay about their worldview and their personal philosophies, after which they were interrogated under bright lights, wired to electrodes, and completely torn down, like they were torn to shreds. These were the kind of techniques they were planning to use on the enemies during the Cold War. So in other words, he was psychologically tormented. Ted even said it was the worst experience of his life. Apparently Ted was already quite an emotional mess before this all started, so it's pretty certain that he had already had a good foundation for what he would do later. However, today, this study is considered highly unethical and would never be done again. Or so we think. Number 7, the Stanford prison experiment, and how it started funny and now it's going down really dark. No light here. I don't know who thought this would be a good idea, or even containable, but hey, it happened. The Stanford prison experiment was a social psychology study that went totally off the wall in 1971. The US Naval Research Office wanted to explore the effect of role-playing and social expectations. The argument was that situations and circumstances affect how people act, not the people themselves. 24 men were assigned either the role of prison guard or inmate, a kind of grown-up cops and robbers game. They were paid $15 an hour, now Ontario's minimum wage, to participate in the study. They committed so hard that by only the second day, the prisoners revolted. Some were even pulled out entirely because it was too much. It all got so bad that it was finally abandoned after 6 days when an outside observer was like, dude, no, this is not okay. This is not okay. Can we end this? Makes one certainly guess all those advertisements saying get money to be a subject for this new scientific study. Ugh, what is it gonna be? Number 6, Red Frankenstein. We know humans and chimps are pretty close relatives, but we are still wholly different beings. But to Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov didn't seem to think so, and in fact wanted to bring us that much closer together. Mostly known for his contribution to artificial insemination, which is a very good thing. It's a good thing. Ivanov also had other plans. By the scientific community, he was known as Red Frankenstein due to his desire to fuse humans with an ape. Despite controversy in the scientific community, Ivanov got the all clear to head to Africa to collect specimens. At first, he artificially inseminated female chimps with human sperm, and then later, the other way around. Obviously, he never succeeded because it was like, guys, this isn't a good idea. But imagine if he had? Terrifying. Thankfully, the project was abandoned, but can you believe that the same guy who revolutionized insemination tried to do this? Actually, kind of, yes I can. Number 5, Kola Super Deep Hole. Human beings certainly love exploring the stars, the ocean below us, but curiosity still remains for what's beneath our feet. A few countries have attempted to get to the center of the Earth, but the Soviets actually managed to get the furthest. From 1970 to 1994, they drilled on the Kola Peninsula and created the deepest hole in the world, extending 7.5 miles into the Earth. However, the project was forced to stop in the early 1990s when they encountered unexpectedly high temperatures. At the bottom hole, they reached temperatures of 180 degrees Celsius, which is 356 degrees Fahrenheit. A drastic difference than anyone expected. The rock was more like melted plastic than rock and impossible to cut through. But other worries about causing earthquakes or even splitting the Earth are rumored to be another reason for why the mission was completely stopped. Number 4, Midnight Climax. Operation Midnight Climax would not be considered at all ethical by any standards of today. God, I hope so. But it does make you wonder how much is happening behind closed doors. Midnight Climax was one of the CIA's, the CIA, most controversial abandoned projects of the past. Tensions were high during the Cold War, and the idea of mind control was too good a tactic not to try and develop. So in the 1950s, the CIA started Operation Midnight Climax. The aim was to research the effects of psychedelics like LSD to see if they could use that to somehow form an extra kind of persuasion. Their unconsenting subjects followed women of the night under their payroll who dosed them with LSD unknowingly. They set up warehouses in San Francisco and NYC to monitor the cases through one-way glass. So essentially like the red light district in Amsterdam, but with CIA funding. With the project being a weird observance of people doing the nasty, the warehouses were shut down in 1965 after the project was discovered. Number 3, Unit 731. So here we go, we're in the top 3. It gets really dark from here on in. Just a fair warning to all of you. If you thought the experiments in the Holocaust were bad, you're right. They were awful, no exceptions there, but did you know that over in Japan they were doing some evil experiments of their own and of the same caliber in Unit 731. The unit was run by Shiro Ishii, an evil genius driven to perform the worst of humanity. Ishii, along with everyone working at Unit 731, performed horrifying experiments to test out disease and biological warfare. The cruel experiments on prisoners of war and Chinese civilians in their encampments would make your stomach churn. They performed live vivisections and infected them with a variety of diseases on top of making them go through hypothermia, frostbite, induced strokes and heart attacks. But this is where things get extra seedy and is probably something the US doesn't like talking about. After the war, Ishii was never punished. He was never persecuted. Instead, the US traded his freedom for all of the information he gathered from his experiments. So on one hand, that makes me sick, and on the other, I am hopeful that the information is being used for good and the dead didn't die in vain. Number 2, the two-headed dog experiment. This sounds as bad as it is. If you love doggos as much as I do, you may want to look away. Fortunately, I have to stay here and tell you about this because it's my job. There have been some fantastic advancements in the field of science which has allowed things like organ transplants to be possible. Many lives have been saved. Vladimir Demikov was the first person to perform a successful coronary artery bypass operation on a warm-blooded creature, but his studies in order to get there were nothing short of horrifying, as you can guess by the title. He stitched the head and front legs of a puppy onto the neck of a German shepherd, and he did this multiple times, and it was a success each and every time. Both dogs could move independently and functioned quite well. However, the tissue was rejected, and out of his 20 subjects, only one survived a full month. Even though this is one of the cruelest things I've ever seen in my life, this is the painful backstory behind how we as humans are able to have organ transplants, and it's kind of insane, and I don't know how I feel. Number 1, the Tuskegee Syphilis Project. Syphilis for centuries was probably one of, if not the most feared STD in the world up until the 1980s when the AIDS epidemic happened. It is truly a horrible disease, but with the development of penicillin, it was suddenly treatable, unless you were a part of this study. Between 1932 all the way up to the 1970s, the US Public Health Service launched a study asking the question as to what happens if syphilis goes untreated. Like we didn't have centuries of evidence at that point, but anyways, you can tell this gets me angry. The study included tracking the progress of syphilis in over 600 African American men in Macon County, Alabama. As you can guess, it was one of the most inhumane, racist, and unethical studies of all time. The men who enrolled were promised to be given free medical care, but they lied to them saying they were treating them for bad blood, which was completely made up. 399 men had latent syphilis, while 201 of them were in a control group. Rather than treating them with penicillin, they were given placebos, aspirin, and mineral substances. Because of their abhorrent behavior, 28 died of syphilis, 100 died of complications relating to the disease, and 40 spouses were undiagnosed, which passed the disease to 19 children. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Project 1794. This project was created with the goal to build a sort of saucer-type aircraft that would be designed to shoot down Soviet bombers. The program, which was created in the 1950s, was quite ambitious and had some pretty lofty goals. A team of engineers began trying to build a disc-shaped aircraft, but here's the real kicker. They wanted it to be capable of traveling at supersonic speeds at high altitudes. The documents about this project show that they wanted it to be able to travel at Mach 4, which is 4 times the speed of sound, and they wanted it to be able to reach an altitude of over 100,000 feet. At the time, the project was estimated to cost about $3 million, which is about $26 million in today's money. In the end, the project was cancelled in 1961 because the craft failed tests and proved to be aerodynamically unstable, which of course would provide a whole slew of problems at high speeds, especially supersonic ones.
Coming in at number 9, the South-North Water Transfer Project in China. The north of China is home to around 50% of China's population of 1.4 billion people. However, they currently only have access to 20% of the country's water resources. This definitely sounds like a big problem, and the South-North Water Transfer Project is an ambitious solution to the issue. So 3 massive canals, each 600 miles in length, are being built to carry water from China's 3 largest rivers. It took them 50 years to finalize the conception of the project. By the end of the 48-year construction schedule, the project will supply 44.8 billion cubic meters of water each year. Now all they have to do is come up with a cool name for it, because right now it's kind of like lackluster, though I'm pretty sure they have a good name for it either in Mandarin or Cantonese, so, you know, maybe it just sounds lame in English. Number 8, London Crossrail Project. If you've ever been to London, England, you've experienced the tube and the terrifying reality that is rush hour. It is packed beyond belief. With close to 10 million people and counting, even a subway system of that size isn't enough. I've seen Toronto in rush hour and I thought that was bad. It's even worse than New York. When I visited London, it was literally like globs of sardines moving together shoulder to shoulder. It was terrifying. But the London Crossrail project is a massive project, duh, otherwise it wouldn't be on this list, that is set on adding 26 miles of new tunnels and 40 new stations on the Elizabeth line. Currently costing over $23 billion, it will add a 10% increase in rail capacity along with air conditioning, walk-through trains, and braking system that reduce energy use by 30%. Pretty chic, you know? Why not? Go for an upgrade. Coming in at number 7, we have Shinkansen in Japan. Speaking of commuter life, Japan has already created one of the fastest trains in the world and plans to use it in their new project, Shinkansen. This is a train made for the future with its sleek and chic design. They're beautiful, fast, safe, and reliable, which is basically the 4 things you want every time you travel. Based on the maglev system, aka the magnetic levitation system, Japan is building a new high-speed rail line that will take occupants 177.8 miles in 40 minutes. To put this into perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you were traveling around 100 miles per hour on the highway, it would take about an hour and 45 minutes to travel that distance. So they cut a lot of time, and that's because this train can travel up to 313 miles per hour, and once this project is completed in 2027, they plan to extend the rail line to Osaka. It is the ultimate commuter train, and man, do I wish they had that in Toronto. I easily spent 2 hours on the TTC in one day because I've been waiting for trains or delays or whatever. Well, we can only dream. Number 6, Great Man-Made River Project in Libya. This next project is so big, it's been in construction since 1985 and it's still got 10 more years before before it finishes cooking. Great things take time, and the Great Man-Made River Project in Libya is the largest irrigation project in the world. When it's finally finished in 2030, it will irrigate 350,000 acres of farmland and increase availability of safe drinking water in Libya's cities. The water source they are using are vast underground reservoirs over 38 to 14,000 years old that they discovered whilst on the search for oil. Before they could even begin laying any pipework down, they had to excavate 85 million cubic meters of desert, and that was just phase 1. That's insane. Like, imagine how they're gonna feel when this is done. Man, oh man, that's perseverance, and it's definitely a project to keep your eye out for. Coming in at number 5, California's high-speed rail project. The project began in 2015, and yes, it's exactly as it sounds. The California high-speed rail is set to be complete in 2029, and its aim is to connect the 10 largest cities in the state of California. From what I've heard from friends who visited California, the transit system isn't the greatest. And the traffic makes you question why you even bothered to get in the car. It'd be faster to walk. But the train is optimistic. It will be 100% electric and powered by renewable energy sources and capable of speeds of up to 200 miles per hour. This incredibly ambitious project will be completed in 2 phases. It will first connect San Francisco and Los Angeles, and then Sacramento to San Diego, totaling 800 miles with 24 new stations altogether. Whew! Number 4, Dubai Land. We've talked a lot about trains, spaceships, water, all things you can find in varying forms, hopefully, at Dubai Land. But before I get too far into this, if you like this video, let us know and press that button and subscribe. You know what to do. You've been to Walt Disney World, you know how massive it is. Well, now that you've got that in your head, Dubai Land is aiming to be 3 times the size of Walt Disney World. It can fit 3 of them in Dubai Land. 3 Walt Disney Worlds in one place. Like, that is Dubai Land. But will it be 3 times the fun? This $64 billion project will have 6 different parts: theme parks, sports venues, tourism, health facilities, science attractions, and hotels, covering a massive 278 square kilometer area. That's about 107 square miles. On top of it being the world's largest attraction site, it will also have the world's largest hotel, 6,500 rooms, and 10 million square foot mall. It will hopefully be completed by 2025, but with COVID and other financial hiccups, the project most likely will take a little longer. Perfect opportunity to save some money before you go. I'll see you there. Number 3, Jubail II. Since its conception in the 1970s, Jubail became the biggest industrial city in the world that was built from the ground up in Saudi Arabia. And it keeps getting bigger. Jubail II is the next step in the project. So far, it has taken over 22 years, but Jubail II is promised to be a gigantic civil engineering project that will double the size of the initial city. It will also attract over 56 billion foreign investments due to the massive industrial capacity, including a huge oil refinery plant, residential units, a university, as well as utilities for water and waste. Oh, and it will create over 55,000 job opportunities, which people will no doubt be clawing for after this pandemic is over, whenever that is. Soon, guys. We just gotta keep going. Number 2, Mazda City. Mazda City is the city of the future. This ongoing urban communities development project aims to be the most sustainable development project in the world. Located next to Abu Dhabi Airport, Mazda City has combined traditional Arabic architecture with modern technology in such a way that they've actually lowered the temperature of the city by 5 degrees. So everywhere else is like 5 degrees hotter. They're cool. Everything is within walking distance, and the buildings are powered by clean energy and reduce the use of energy and water consumption by 40%. Eventually, the city aims to expand in order to host 19,000 other occupants by introducing schools and other businesses. It is a remarkable feat towards green living and has become the green blueprint for the rest of the world. Last but not least, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor. This is the world's largest nuclear fusion project. What is nuclear fusion, you ask? Nuclear fusion is when 2 or more nuclei are fused together, which creates an outburst of energy, which follows the formula of E equals mc squared. That's a very simplistic description of it. As you can probably tell, I'm not a scientist. Wish I was. To give you a good idea, the best example of nuclear fusion is the sun. Nuclear fusion is what gives the sun its power. It constantly occurs on the surface of our star. So on the sun, hydrogen atoms break apart under immense heat and pressure and combine to create a heavier element called helium. So in the process, it loses some mass, and this loss of mass is then multiplied by the square of the speed of light, which results in a massive burst of energy, which is E. Therefore, Einstein's E equals mc squared. So the reason we care about it so much is that it has the potential to provide an insane amount of energy to power our cities across the world, which is exactly what this mammoth of a project is trying to do. This $25 billion endeavor aims to produce sustainable fusion energy for commercial sale and is being financed by the European Union, the UK, China, India, Russia, Japan, South Korea, and the United States. So when it says it's international in the title, it pretty much means it. Weighing in at 23,000 tons and standing several stories high, this is probably the most complicated engineering project in human history. They're literally trying to create the sun on Earth so we can power our computers and turn on the lights in our house. Like, how insane is that?
Number 10, Wilhelm Reich's Cloudbusters. I don't even know how to begin this one. The experiments of Wilhelm Reich believed to have the answer as to why the sky was blue. His reason? Because it was so damn sexy. Reich was heavily influenced by Freud's work on the human libido and believed that he could relate human orgasms to the weather. He proposed a widespread kind of energy called orgon. You might have heard of orgonite. Orgon was everywhere, and Reich said he could measure this energy in motion across the Earth. His description literally sounds like the Force from Star Wars, but like sexy. He believed that when people had orgasms, they discharged their energy, which if harnessed, could be used to treat diseases like cancer. Ridiculous. In the 1950s, he went so far as to involve aliens, as he believed they were spraying the Earth with some kind of radiation that inhibited the orgasm energy. So he made the Cloudbuster with his son, which essentially was a row of tubes attached to hoses immersed in water aimed at the sky. It was supposed to absorb the radiation and make it rain, which happened once. Many believe it was just a coincidence. Did it work? We may never know. Right or wrong, we will never know. They ordered Reich's various machines and apparatuses to be destroyed and had him jailed for trying to smuggle them out of state. In our number 9 spot today, we have Operation Crossroads. This operation is the name for all of the US nuclear bomb tests that took place at the Bikini Atoll in 1946. Following World War II, the threat of nuclear war was at the front of everyone's minds, which led people to want to test their nuclear powers, and the US president at the time, Harry Truman, ordered that the military continue to test nuclear weapons just in case they were needed in the future. Unfortunately, Bikini was the place that was chosen to be the testing site, since all planes and ships traveled on routes that weren't close to the area. This wasn't the most secret mission there's ever been, and the testing that took place on Bikini is now well known, but newly declassified documents shed a lot of light onto how the residents of Bikini were affected by these tests, and it also shows the objections that both scientists and military officials had before the tests were done, and the rationale that was used in the decision making when it came to go against all of those objections. In our number 8 spot today, we have Dr. Zhivago. During the Cold War, the CIA began distributing the book Dr. Zhivago throughout the Soviet Union. You might be sitting there thinking that doesn't really sound like an issue of national security, and I thought the exact same thing when I started learning about this secret little project. As it turns out, there was actually a reason behind it. The book was written by the Russian writer Boris Pasternak, and it was banned by the Soviets. It is said that the ban was because the book portrayed an open-minded view of the Bolshevik Revolution, and because the protagonist of the book was individualistic. The CIA saw this as an opportunity to use the book as a tool, as propaganda, so they used some of their allies for help and began delivering copies of the books into the hands of those in the Soviet Union. There isn't a lot of information about what exact effects this had on the Soviet Union, if any, but it does give insight into how the smallest things were done during this time in history, just for one common goal. We often hear about the large missions with technological advancements and tons of money thrown into them, so it makes sense why this small one might often get overlooked. In our number 7 spot today, we have Project Iceworm. This secret mission took place in the 1960s, and it was basically intended to build a series of mobile nuclear missile launch sites under the Greenland ice sheet, because this would then house medium-range missiles close enough that they would be able to strike targets within the Soviet Union. This project was called Project Iceworm, but there was another project called Camp Century. Basically, Camp Century was to test out Project Iceworm and see how likely it would be and how feasible it would be. So engineers went to work and created a network of underground tunnels and buildings that included places to stay, a kitchen, a hall for hanging out, there were supply rooms, and even a communication center and a nuclear power plant. This was all kept as a super secret for a long time and was even kept from the Danish government for 7 years. In 1966, however, the project was cancelled because of the shifting ice. This created unstable conditions for the underground tunnels that are most likely crushed now, but still remain beneath the Arctic. In our number 6 spot today, we have Project Grudge. No, this is not about the one I have against my ex-bestie. This project was short-lived and took place in 1949. The objective of this project was to study unidentified flying objects, or UFOs. Basically because of research from before that stated that while some UFOs seemed to be actual aircrafts, there wasn't enough data recorded and facts known about them in order to determine where they had come from. This is actually one project that had a lot of critics surrounding it, and apparently those critics felt like the project was only trying to debunk UFO reports, and I have to ask, even if that was true, why is that a bad thing? I'd like someone to give me a perfectly reasonable explanation for every UFO. I guess the issue really arose because people were feeling like no actual research was being put into the UFOs, and it was more about the objects being evaluated based on the idea that they don't exist, that they all had to be man-made here on Earth, and even beforehand the idea of extraterrestrials were ruled out. In our number 5 spot today, we have Operation Gladio. This was a plan that was developed during the Cold War by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. Basically, the plan was designed to keep Europe as safe as possible if there were to be a Soviet invasion. Basically, the plan was to form these kinds of secret armies in many NATO countries like Italy, Belgium, and France. These armies would be preparing for a potential takeover, and they would then lead the resistance if this were to occur. Some of the preparations for this plan, should it have to go forward, were things like spying, as well as hoarding ammunition, which is a frightening thought. This project was so secret that not only was the Soviet Union obviously kept out of the loop, but some of the highest ranking officials in the countries involved didn't even know about these little secret armies. In our number 4 spot today, we have Operation Washtub. This operation came to light in 2014 when documents became declassified and more people could learn about this Cold War era operation. Basically, this was a covert mission that had its sights set on Alaska. The plan detailed the training of different people who lived in Alaska. We're talking just ordinary residents. They wanted to train these people to both code and decode and a few other different spying tactics, which would have been so cool. I mean, I would have wanted to be picked so badly. Not that I would have known it was even happening, but you get what I mean. Basically, the plan was put in place in case the Soviet Union was to invade Alaska. Then these unsuspecting ordinary citizens would use their newly learned espionage techniques to get all the intel they could and secretly relay the information to high-ranking US officials. As we now know, of course, this invasion never occurred, so the contingency plan wasn't needed, but 89 lucky temporary agents were trained just for this purpose. In our number 3 spot today, we have Acoustic Kitty. Apparently in 1976, the CIA was spending millions of dollars trying to make cats into spies. I don't know why they chose the one animal that does not care what you want it to do, but alas, they did, and Project Acoustic Kitty was born. The project basically involved implanting electronic spy equipment into real living cats, who would then be trained to basically eavesdrop on unsuspecting people. This is another one of those Cold War era plans that was intended to be used on those in the Soviet Union. The project had a whole slew of issues, of course, however, because cats can get hungry and distracted, and unfortunately the first time this plan was being tested, there was a catastrophic outcome. The project was of course cancelled, and the researchers said that they believed they could train cats to move short distances, but that, quote, the environmental and security factors in using this technique in a real foreign situation forces us to conclude that for our intelligence purposes, it would not be practical. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Lunic kidnapping. Don't worry, Lunic is not a person and instead is a Soviet lunar satellite that was kidnapped just for one night. This project honestly sounds like it was taken straight from a movie, and it has to do with the Great Space Race. In the early 1960s, the Soviet Union wanted to make it as clear as possible that they were winning the race to space, so they launched a multinational exhibition of their Lunic satellites, which became the first spacecraft to impact the moon's surface, and when the Luna 3 returned, it brought with it the first ever pictures of the moon's far side. It was a big deal, and it's safe to say that the US wanted to know everything they could about it. Of course, the
satellite was heavily guarded, but it was traveling from city to city for this exhibition, so undercover CIA agents went to work. Basically, they convinced the man who drove the transport truck to get some rest at a nearby hotel, and basically they would just look after it for him for a while he rested. I'm sure it was a bit more complicated than this, but you get the gist. From here, the agents then took apart and photographed every single component of the thing before putting it all back together, placing it back in the truck for its next tour date. There's no indication that before the operation became declassified that anyone outside of those involved knew what had happened, and I'm not gonna lie, that's a pretty hilarious plan, and the fact that it worked is both shocking and impressive. In our number 1 spot today, we have Project Horizon. Even before people were going to space, we had big goals in mind for the world of space travel. In 1959, there were plans for a proposed manned military base that would be located, of course, on the moon. This plan, which was dubbed Project Horizon, would, quote, develop and protect potential United States interest on the moon, as said in now declassified documents. It was estimated at the time to cost about $6 billion, and the projected operational date was December of 1966, which is when they thought that they could have 12 soldiers on the base by. The project not only wanted to study more about the surface of the moon, but what better of a place to spy on the Earth than the moon? This project, of course, never came to fruition, and the reason it stopped progressing was because the president at the time, Dwight Eisenhower, rejected it at the same time that the responsibility for America's space program was being transferred over to NASA.